Hello, and welcome back to Transylvaniacs, the chronicling of a perhaps insane and impossible journey to watch as many Dracula adaptations as possible.
Each episode, we try to watch every adaptation of Dracula, from Dracula A to Dracula Z. So if you are a fan of the Romanian-Australian band Transylvaniacs, I am very sorry. We are different guys, but hey, maybe stick around.
That's so funny. I remember when we first put the first episode up and had a bunch of stuff on social media, one of my friends tagged the band Transylvaniacs, and then she was like, "Oh fuck, this is the wrong page." I was like, No, we don't have Instagram. That's just some dudes in Romania.
No, we're putting them on blast. There's a new sheriff in town.
Exactly. Even though culturally they have the right, whereas we are just two people in Pennsylvania, Transylvania. There's also a joke somewhere in there that I feel like we're going to have to make at some point, but I'm too tired to figure it out right now.
There is a good joke about it on The Simpsons in the Treehouse of Horror episode where it's like a parody of a bunch of different vampire movies, and Homer's like, "It's so nice of Mr. Burns to invite us to his country home in Pennsylvania."
That's very good. That's very good. And accurate, because Pennsylvania is a terrifying place. Though less terrifying because we're recording this after the midterms, and we won in a lot of ways I did not think we were going to win. So
yeah, I am sleeping easier these days.
Holy hell, yes. I was talking with my wife about it, and we were like, okay, look, I don't think we're going to get both Senate seat and governor. And as much as I love John Fetterman, I would prefer to not have Doug Mastriano be the governor of the state in which I currently reside. And fortunately, both of those things happened. Wow, dreams can come true.
We're doing it right. We are somehow doing it right. Now I just have to worry about the various supernatural threats of Pennsylvania instead of the very real threat to bodily rights and basic liberties.
Speaking of supernatural, I have a friend who's really into cryptids and stuff, which is a whole internet subculture I have zero information or really interest in, but I just kind of have received it via cultural osmosis. And apparently there is a cryptid that is local to Pennsylvania, referred to as a squonk, which is a really ugly pig. I will try to put a picture of it in the bio, the description of this episode, because I love the idea that Pennsylvania's quote cryptid is just super fucking ugly.
Oh, was the squonk there?
Yeah, the squonk, exactly. He granked himself. And I'm not going to explain the grank. We're going to leave that. If you don't know what the grank is, you got to learn up on the grank, okay?
I know at least 2 listeners out there get it.
Exactly, who know the grank.
You know who you are.
This is not a grank podcast. Anyway.
No, speaking of our wonderful, beautiful, gorgeous listeners, we've started to get a couple 5-star reviews on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and we want to just say thank you so much for doing that. If
for real,
you want to continue to make our day, please give us a 5-star review if you can. If you are out there comfortable with being put on the spot and being perceived, we would be happy to give you a shout out in our future episodes.
We will, in fact, perceive you. And you know what? If you don't want to give us a 5-star review, give us a 1-star review. Fucking fight me.
Yeah.
leave me some haterade. As somebody who used to be intensely conflict avoidant, but has now written enough things on the internet where I find negative comments really funny, I'm not encouraging this, for the record, and I don't actually think anybody would do that, but I did a 180 from would be extremely hurt by any criticism of my creative work to actively getting some sort of reverse masochistic schadenfreude out of it. That's kind of all you need to know about writing satire on the internet, is that even if somebody hates it, usually it's because they don't get it, which is fun.
I'm still a fragile little baby, so don't leave us a 5-star. Please don't leave us a 1-star review.
No.
I can't take that.
No. Will is a delicate baby man, and please be nice.
Please.
But yes, thank you so much for everybody who's actually done that. I'm like genuinely very touched and a little surprised, actually. For the keen and regular listeners in our audience, you may be a little confused by the title of this episode because in our last episode, which was reviewing the Spanish language Dracula, you may have heard us say, next time, we're going to be watching the 1958 horror of Dracula, the Hammer film starring Christopher Lee, with a mystery guest. And that's not this episode. So the reason we're doing that, of course, is because we just have a deep respect for the chronology of this project and felt that we had to do 1953 before 58. And not because we recorded the entire episode and our guest deleted his audio and cannot recover it. That would be absurd.
No, it's not for that reason at all. We are just really dedicated to chronology.
Really, really dedicated. And we wanted to watch another black and white foreign film instead of a really fun, goofy time. Actually, this surprised me though.
It did.
So yeah, to get cut to the chase, this week we are taking a look at the 1953 Drakula İstanbul'da, otherwise known as Dracula in Istanbul, directed by Mehmet Muhtar. And I did not know shit about this, as I'm pretty sure 99% of people listening to this, which will come out to almost exactly 99 people, I'm sure. Do you want to give us a little bit of background on the cast and crew of our subject for this week, Will?
Absolutely. Well, you already mentioned Mehmet Muhtar as director for this one. Writers included Turgut Demirag, Umit Deniz, and Mehmet Muhtar, putting in some writing duty as well. Cinematography was handled by Ozen Sermet. And our cast here, we've got Dracula as portrayed by Atif Kaptan. Our version of Harker, who's called Azmi in this, is played by Bülent Orhan. Annie Ball played Gushin, which is this movie's version of Mina. Kemal Emin Bara plays Dr. Nasi Eren, who is Van Helsing in this little feature here. Efer Faray as Sadan, or Shadan. I'm going to mispronounce a lot of these names. I'm sorry to our Turkish listener base. Anyway, this is Lucy in that movie. And we've got Kahit Ergat as Turan, who is Holmwood in this. And there's one last cast member that I think was really notable. I don't know if this is who he played, but there is not really a Renfield, but there is like a wacky little hunchback servant in Dracula's castle with like a fake nose mustache.
Holy shit.
I think that might be Ahmet Daniel Topatan, but don't quote me on that to the extent you would quote me about this.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, basically what you're going to see as a recurring theme with this is that this movie is A, shockingly good. B, there is not a lot written about it and not a lot of resources about it. So even though we tried our best to do some research, most of this is from IMDb and Wikipedia, as there's just not a ton floating out there about a Turkish Dracula adaptation from 1953. But yeah, something that we wanted to touch on kind of first off the bat is we've been going through the plot very loosely of each of our films that we're kind of taking a look at. This movie, by far, is the most faithful adaptation of the novel. So to kind of reiterate here, we begin with Azmi, who again is our Harker counterpart, who goes to Romania as opposed to Transylvania, but close enough to do a real estate transaction, much like the original. And the first third of this is almost beat for beat exactly the same as the castle section of the novel. Excepting that we have one bride instead of three, but that doesn't matter as much because three is really just a numbers game. They don't all have separate personalities. They can be distilled into a single woman, and she's in pretty much one scene. But eventually, Harker, aka Azmi, escapes and then goes back to Turkey. And in this one, as you'll find, which is kind of a fun twist, a lot of this has a kind of like strangely nationalist bent, and that makes sense, as the original novel is very much English nationalist. Everything here takes place in Istanbul, and there's some important cultural distinctions that are made. And we meet Azmi's wife, Guza, who is our Mina analog. And then we kind of follow things pretty strictly in how they pan out in the novel. There's a couple of important changes, so we don't ever go back to Romania. The climax of the movie takes place in Istanbul, and a lot of the minor details are changed. But this is a pretty bang on beat for beat adaptation. And did you want to get in a little bit into why that might be that way?
So yes, the reason that this one is so accurate in some ways is that this was not actually a adaptation directly of Bram Stoker's novel, but rather of a 1928 bootleg translation by Ali Reza Saifi that was called Kazikli Voyvoda, which is a shortened version in many ways. It follows the same beats, but cuts out excess characters. For example, this version of the novel lacks Renfield. The pursuit, the Transylvania at the end of the book, is completely cut out. It changes a few things to make the book have more of a Turkish patriotic bent, as well as subbing out Christianity for Islam. One of the other things it notes is that the Gang of Light, aka are a trio of dudes who fight Dracula in this movie, are, in this version of the book, all veterans of the Turkish War for Independence. And as the site Taliesin Meets the Vampires notes, and I quote, "Any mention of possible polyandry is lost," which I think is a real bummer. They really missed out.
That's so fucking funny. And I love that it notes that specifically because, like, we've kind of hinted at that about the book. We're like, wow, it's giving Harry, Cooper, and Albert from Twin Peaks. You know what I mean? Like, it's just three dudes like having the time of their life. And I love that in this Turkish version, there was like, there will be none of that. We will have three stoic men, and they will have no possibly romantic feelings toward each other, or even anything that could be discerned as friendship.
Saifi saw this throuple happening. He's like, nope, absolutely not for the Turkish population.
Absolutely not in 1953, baby. Yeah, that's very funny. I think that we need to have some sort of sound cue whenever we say Gang of Light, where we have like a metalcore riff, so we can remind everybody of our hardcore band from like 2002. And we're just gonna not make it the Bill and Ted metal riff, but even though that would please you greatly.
To no end.
To no end. Anyway, so this, again, being adapted from a bootleg translation makes a lot of sense. A little bit about this production and the nature of this movie. So you can actually find this on YouTube. That's how we watched it. And this print is not in good shape, fam. It is interesting to me to take a look at the technology at the time. So this film, particularly the rip that we were watching, is really has some serious damage to it, both in terms of audio and visual. And seeing a film made in the West in 1953 versus one made in Turkey is interesting to me. Just kind of like, what was the ways in which the technology was spread out throughout the world? And it becomes very clear that they were working with things that were already outdated. Like, my main note with this is that this both looks like and is acted like a silent film. Some of that comes from the fact that I believe it's all ADR, correct?
Yeah, I think particularly Annie Ball, who, according to some of the notes I found, did not speak like a Turkish. She's definitely ADR'd, and you can definitely tell that her mouth movement is not in sync with the dialogue, but I think everyone across the board is just ADR'd in general.
Right, which makes it feel very much like they filmed a silent film and then just kind of like dubbed it as opposed to doing intertitles. But yeah, the combination of the quality of the actual film, the fact that you're hearing this kind of really disconnected and not synced up overdub, and that it's really damaged. And the only version we were able to find has some pretty janky translation as well, which is too bad. Like, I, despite all of that, wound up really enjoying this film. And I
do not think Dracula is spelled the same twice throughout the entire translation. It gets close, but I think my favorite is Dracula spelled Drequla.
Oh, that's a good one. I actually didn't catch that. My favorite like translation gaffe was in the scene where Dracula is making Harker like write a bunch of letters and postmark them in the future, which again, like super sus. And Harker does not care about that at all in any version of this novel. He's like, oh yeah, that seems fine. But the translation said like, I would like you to write 3 emails. I was like, that's good. That's
Oh my
funny.
God, I can't believe I missed that.
It's good. I'll send you a screen cap of it. But yeah, like I'd like you to write 3 emails. By the end of the day, Asmi, slam. But yeah, I think the most noticeable thing for this for me was the quality of the technology at the time, and how I had to keep reminding myself that this was created in the 50s, and it looks like Nosferatu. You know what I mean? Like it. While I was watching it, that's the effect that it had on me. It looked even less contemporary than the 1931 Dracula. You know?
Oh yeah, I think even with the standards of where cinematography was in with the Universal movies back in the 30s, this one is still much more stilted. They're doing even less dramatic camera work than they were doing in 31. And I mean, a lot of it is probably just due to whatever equipment they had on hand. I mean, I don't want to lay the blame for this totally on Ozan Sermet, who's a cinematographer. I don't know what kind of equipment he was working on, but yeah, it does not feel like a movie that was made in US or in England in the 50s.
Yeah, exactly. And like that's kind of to be expected. It was just interesting to see because like this is probably the first Turkish film I've ever seen. I don't know. So it was an interesting introduction both as an adaptation and as like a piece of foreign cinema that I was just like deeply unfamiliar with, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think I've seen a Turkish film either before this. I'm kind of curious to see if other movies from this era were of a similar filmic quality or if this is unique to this one film.
Yeah, no, good point. Perhaps that will be another quest we can go on. Regardless, a little bit more about the production of this film. There's not a lot that we were able to find, but there's a couple of really fun little bits here. I really enjoyed the way that they had Dracula appear in ways, again, that reminded me of Nosferatu, where they have him just like kind of pop, like teleport into a scene. Like they'll just cut it with like, they'll have one shot where he's not there and then just have the exact same shot where he is. So it kind of has this air of magic about Dracula that we have not gotten that much so far. That and combined with a couple of other effects later is this felt much more like a fantasy, if that makes sense.
Yes. No, you're really onto something there. If it's using a lot of, again, we discussed in our Nosferatu episode, it's using a lot of the earliest cinematic language that goes back to the films of like George Méliès, of just using in-camera tricks to make characters appear or disappear in frame. You've got a coffin lid that just sort of floats above the air on some string before lowering down. This is the first movie, and I think probably the last one we see for a while, that actually has Dracula scaling up and down the walls of the castle, and I think that's probably, they just, built a fake castle wall on the ground and just had our Dracula here, Atif Kaptan, just sort of scurry around on all fours.
Which was so fun because like that's a really big moment in the novel, and I think it's interesting that we've yet to see it thus far. But they did a really good job with it, and I love seeing older films like this where you get these really like old school practical effects because like, yeah, they don't look like quote real, but there's something to be said for somebody actually doing something and you can see the physical effect it has on them as opposed to a green screen, So I really liked the in-camera effects in this a lot.
I have one note about one of the effects here. This is from IMDb's Fun Facts. I have no idea if there's no source for this. I don't want to be a source. I don't care. I need this to be true. This is that for the scene in the graveyard where there is a lot of fog, there were no fog machines used. There's no dry ice used. Instead, they had 30 stagehands puffing on cigarettes just outside of the cameras to produce the fog.
I love that so much. And again, I'm the same way. I'm like, I don't care if that's completely unverified. The image is funny enough to make it true in my heart.
I I cannot tell you how much I need this to be true.
Oh god, just like 30 like Turkish dudes just like chain smoking just off camera. Same buddy, same. Oh, to be a Turkish stagehand in 1953 on the set of Drakula İstanbul'da.
Taking your break from smoking on set to your smoke break afterwards.
Exactly. You get it. One other note, kind of before we get into some of the characters and performances, is that this is, as you mentioned, this has much more of a Turkish patriotic bent, obviously, because it is adapted from a transliteration. But this makes a very clear connection between the historical figure of Vlad the Impaler, makes a very clear connection between the historical figure of Vlad the Impaler, who, if I am correct, there was also a very funny translation gaffe where he's referred to as the poker.
There is. I laughed so hard.
Holy shit. I really enjoyed that. But yeah, so that makes sense to me because that's a figure that Turkish audiences would have been familiar with, and it's interesting to watch this after we just watched Spanish language Dracula, where you can see how directors and studios would try to tailor to their audience. So how the original novel was changed to a Turkish version of the novel, changed to a Turkish version of the film, and how Vlad the Impaler would be a lot easier for them to relate to than perhaps the Irish novel from, sometimes 60 years earlier.
Yeah. And I think what I was looking into, what scant research is there, because of that one part of the mystery of the beginning of this film, particularly for Turkish audiences, would be, is this guy a descendant of Vlad Tepes, or is this actually him?
Right. And that will actually, that makes me excited to watch Castlevania whenever the fuck we get to that. That definitely was part of the allure for audiences at the time, was to see a fun take on a mythical but real historical figure that they were familiar with. So in terms of our characters, I guess we will start with Guzin, who is our Mina counterpart. I thought this was a very interesting take on her. So Guzin is again played by Annie Ball, who did not speak any Turkish. And I could not find anything about her as an actress, but it is very clear to me that there was an influence culturally where she is supposed to be the Marilyn Monroe in the way that she is styled and acted. She has she's blonde, unlike pretty much anybody else in the film. And Mina's occupation in this, as opposed to a school teacher, is a showgirl. So we have a lot of extended scenes of her doing these kind of classic 50s showgirl routines, sometimes for like a lot longer than they should be in terms of the runtime of this movie. But I thought that was kind of an interesting choice, as opposed to a lot of different adaptations we've seen Lucy kind of be the more seductive of the two women, and Mina being much more down to earth and kind of your final girl, if you will. Whereas this reversed that, where the Lucy counterpart, Shadan, A, doesn't have a lot to do in this movie, but B, seems much more reserved. So I thought it was an interesting choice to go with a kind of like Western Hollywood starlet as their protagonist, especially with Mina.
Absolutely. And, it's something that when I first saw that introduction where you get her given the old razzle-dazzle on stage, there was a moment where I was like, okay, this is a choice. But, as it plays out, it kind of works, I think. I think it...
Same. Like, it kind of works, yeah.
Because I feel like the thing with Mina in the book is that she's this modern woman. She's sort of at this cusp between classical English womanhood in this modern woman who is well-versed in modern technology and can carry herself on her own. And you get that a lot with Gujin. She, in addition to having her own career separate from her husband, she's married to Azmi from the get-go in this, rather than having their nuptials come later. She doesn't really take shit from anyone. There's like a creepy producer or someone who wants to who's trying to hit on her, and she's like, dude, fuck off. I am committed to my husband. And I mean, she has her own separate life. She has her own car that she drives. She is like fully just her own person.
And I think you see that both in the script with how she acts, all of these different ways that she's been given independence, but also her costuming looks very, very Western, like later 50s, where she's wearing like blazers and tailored pants and is not particularly feminine in a classic way where you would think of in 1953 feminine. Like, she's not giving Audrey Hepburn, like she's giving Katharine Hepburn a little bit. And
Hi-yo!
Heyo, but I thought this was a really cool interpretation of the character. They don't have many similarities in terms of, you know, how they speak and the role that they play in the film, but I really like what you said about how there was taking the modern woman, you know, from 1897 England and the modern woman from 1953 Turkey, and what that looks like and how you see that on film. I really thought that this was a cool way to take her. I also really enjoyed, this is the first decent Harker we have had.
Oh my god, I did not expect this at all. I expected, you know, he goes through the same motions at the beginning, and I expected him to just be toast, not do anything at the end of this movie. And no, this Osmi is, I mean, he's S tier Harker right now.
Yeah, seriously, he's the best Harker by a mile. He's acted really, really phenomenally. He has much more agency than any other Harker, and then actually than pretty much anybody else in this movie excepting Guzin. And he becomes kind of an action hero at the end. Like, usually, what we'll see later again when we watch kind of the evolution of these movies is we're going to see the main showdown is usually going to be Dracula and Van Helsing, because that's what makes the most sense for contemporary adaptations. But Harker is the action hero in the end of this and does all of the fighting. And it was kind of surprising because usually he has his first third of the film and then he gets scared and that's it for him. But I was shocked and really liked seeing this performance. Could you remind me of the actor's name?
Yeah, this is Bülent Orhan.
He was great. He was really handsome. I loved his costuming as well, kind of this gangster-looking fedora, which felt a little bit like a callback to the Lugosi Dracula. But yeah, those two as your two protagonists, I think were really, really strong, both in terms of performances and character writing. And then, unfortunately, things kind of go downhill.
Yeah, the rest of the cast is not up to Azmi and Goshin's level at all.
Not at all, no. So Shadan, who's Lucy, who's played by Aoife Ferre, she was okay, but I've been disappointed in our Lucys pretty much across the board so far. Like, we've not gotten a good one yet, and we probably won't for a while. She's a hard character to pull off in an adaptation, especially one that has sub 2 hour runtime. And then our Holmwood was okay, but not a lot going on there. And again, we cut Seward entirely, and we cut Quincy. We've yet to see an on-screen Quincy, but we'll get there someday, buddy.
There's a moment when I saw how faithful this is going to be, particularly in that first third of the movie. I had this moment like, what if they do it? What, they've done everything else so right so far. What if this Turkish adaptation I learned about like a week ago is the first Dracula to get Quincy on screen? I would lose my mind.
And yet, I am so sorry you were disappointed by this particular facet.
I mean, someday. What is my life if not heartbreak?
Yep, particularly about your mans. And then we have Van Helsing, who was like kind of a combination of roles of Seward and Van Helsing in this version, who was again fine. We've yet to have a really good Van Helsing either. We don't really get that until later adaptations when they decide that he's got to be an action hero as well. But we went with the kind of bumbling old dude archetype here.
And this is, I think, maybe our oldest Van Helsing yet.
Yeah, he was pretty old. And then before we get to the problem of Dracula, we have to spend some time talking about our little servant man. So this adaptation, as we've talked about, does not have a Renfield character, which is both too bad and fine. Like, it's too bad in that it's a very faithful adaptation in a lot of other ways. But when you think about taking the novel Dracula and trying to adapt it to film, Renfield is a really difficult character to deal with because he spends so much of the novel, like, either in a completely different place or doing things that, like, are really hard to film. You know what I mean? Like, there's only so much time we can spend watching one man eat bugs.
Yeah, exactly. I think he doesn't serve the same purpose if you have him just sort of skittering about, obsessing over eating bugs. It's just like, weird! Well, anyway, on to the actual threat.
Moving on. So it's a hard character to adapt. So in this version, they were like, yeah, fuck it, but we need to have somebody else in the castle, which I was kind of surprised to see that they were like, why not give Dracula a little servant guy? And this little servant guy was amazing. I loved him so much.
He gave it his all. Again, I think this is Ahmet Daniel Topatan. I could not find what this character's name was. Everyone just refers to him as Dracula's servant. So I took my best guess based off of the dude who on IMDb looked the most like the character, which is not easy, mind you, because this guy is wearing like truly the most bodacious fake nose and mustache combination I've ever seen in my life.
It is massive. It's incredible. Like, it is a huge prosthetic nose and like 4 inches of mustache that pretty much cover his entire mouth. And he's just a short little guy, and he does a great job where he winds up kind of being an unlikely ally to Harker and tries to like help him out and get him out of the castle, and then gets immediately murdered by Dracula, which was too bad. But he really stole the show. Aside from our main couple there, he had a great performance, and I enjoyed all 5 minutes of the movie he was in.
I think he really helped pick up the pace of the castle sequence, because for a lot of it, particularly when Dracula is not there, a lot of the movie at that point is Osmi just wandering around unhurriedly with this really kind of jaunty music playing in the background.
Yes.
There's no tension in it.
It felt a little aimless for large sections of that first third. So completely in agreement. We needed some tension, and it came from our fun little dude there who shall remain nameless, not by our choosing. And then we come to Atif Kaptan as Dracula, and we're going to see this problem in our next movie, fingers crossed, which will in fact be Horror of Dracula, the Hammer film from 1958 starring Christopher Lee, where Dracula, although he is the central character, is not actually on screen very much, does not speak often, and does not have a lot to do. And as a result, we wind up with a villain who is kind of really fucking boring, dude.
Yeah. I mean, at least, and I can't say this for sure because I definitely haven't watched Horror of Dracula, and I'm just speculating. But if I were to speculate, at least in Horror of Dracula, allegedly, Christopher Lee has some real stage presence with bloodshot eyes and a ferocious look. And Atif Kaptan's got some eyebrows going on. And that's it.
Yep. It is too bad. It is like pretty much as milquetoast as it gets. And it's hard when you have an already kind of tricky adaptation where you've cut a lot of characters, but you're trying to keep it faithful. It takes the wind out of the sails. And it is even more noticeable here than in Spanish language Dracula with Carlos Valeria's kind of lame performance. This one was less goofy than that, though. This was just boring. Carlos Valeria's was like actually goofy.
But he is giving it his all. Even if his scary face is decidedly unscary, he's going for it and committing to trying to do something. And at no point do I really feel that Atif Kaptan is trying to get to that level or bring any sort of menace. He does not really have a presence in any of the scenes that he's in.
No, agreed. And like some of it is that like he doesn't really look the part. Like, I feel like they just kind of were like, all right, who is an available actor in Turkey who can film this for us, who is of this age and could wear a cape, and some admittedly really goofy looking fangs. I also keep seeing written in places that this is the first Dracula movie to feature fangs, which that's wrong, right? Like, that's incorrect.
Yeah, I've now seen this applied to like several movies,
Yes.
this factoid, and it's never right.
It is never right. Like everybody's like, "Oh, this was the first Dracula to XYZ," and like that is wrong. If you ever see anything that claims to be the first Dracula, incorrect. But particularly to feature fangs.
It's like in when you travel across the East Coast and like people are like, "Oh, well, George Washington stayed here."
100%. That is exactly it. But yeah, it was a letdown, and it's too bad that he wound up being the central character. But it was also kind of a blessing that he's not in much of it. I will say though, the climactic scene, where Dracula has been after Mina after Lucy has passed, again, we don't go back to Romania. We stay in Istanbul. He follows Mina to her work, where she, again, is a showgirl, and makes her dance, like, on stage for him, and sits in the audience and makes the piano play by itself. And that was actually genuinely very spooky to me. I liked the way it was filmed. Again, it felt more like a fantasy, and there was kind of like a magical element. But there was also something very menacing about it in terms of like the way he spoke about her was really degrading and dehumanizing. And like, again, he doesn't have that many lines in the whole movie, but for him to like show up and immediately be pretty explicitly sexual and exploitative with her was effective. It was like 2 minutes from the end of the movie, but it was a cool way to kind of end things before the fight with Harker.
I will say I'll knock some points off because it's not really a supernatural terror. It's frankly a kind of too common terror.
Yeah,
like,
no, and I think that's why
a weird,
it was effective.
creepy guy showing up at your work is unfortunately too real.
Too fucking real, and like, yeah, it hit in a contemporary way that I don't think that they could have predicted, but that was a cool way to kind of end things and wrap it up and tie in all of the stuff with Guzan, because again, it's her work, which she's very proud of and very independent in, and to have her be coerced into doing this for a man who is not her husband, in a direct reflection of the scene where she's like almost assaulted, was actually a pretty tasty little way to do the climactic scene. And then Harker shows up and they fight, and thanks, buddy. Oh, also Dracula on his way to go stalk Mina, there's like the owner of the club where she works, he fully just fucking punches him in the face. Did you catch that?
Oh my god, yes!
I was not expecting that at all.
It is. And it's not like a sneak attack. He, like, if I remember correctly, he fully just, like, taps the guy in the shoulder and then just socks him the moment it turns around. It's
socks
incredible.
him right in the jaw. I was like, you are an all-powerful vampire, and you were like, you know what? Fuck this guy in particular. But that made me laugh.
That is something I always have a weakness for, when, like, a character that is supposed to be all-powerful or supernatural or have mystical powers just fucking decks a guy. It is always funny to me.
It is always, because it is funny. It's great. It's a good time. But yeah, I guess in terms of our characters and our performances, that's kind of where we're at. In terms of like little details, again, this was our most faithful adaptation that we've seen. There are some changes, obviously, but there were some really small details that I enjoyed. The making Harker write letters that are postmarked incorrectly is like just really creepy. I love that. Climbing up the wall, which we discussed. A translation moment that we both pointed out, where Dracula stops one of the wives from attacking Harker. What he's, and in the novel we've talked about the changes in that scene in terms of Dracula's dialogue. What he says in the translation of this is, "How dare you touch my man?"
Ali Ariza's safe. He's like, "Damn it! I tried to keep the shit out of this."
God damn it! So good. And this is our first time where we see a newborn baby like referenced as being, eaten. In the novel, Dracula brings the wives a suspicious bag that definitely is not crying because there's a baby in it. And you see Shadan, who is Lucy, just like walking around holding a baby. And you're like, oh, she's planning on eating that.
I think this is also one of the few times where you also see her just like the moment she's confronted, just dropping a baby, just being like, no, done with this.
Done with this fucking baby. Get out of here. In terms of the cultural changes, like you mentioned earlier, this replaces Christianity with Islam, and that leads to some really interesting moments because so much of vampire lore in general and the novel is based on Christianity. What that led to were a couple of really, in my opinion, funny moments because there are no crucifixes, right? So they're not warding Dracula off with a crucifix, but in the lore of things, they're like, okay, we have garlic, that will do the trick. So there's definitely a scene where people are just holding full bulbs of garlic up at either Shadan or Dracula while they cower in fear, and it's a little funny to see people be like, oh god, garlic.
Yeah, I think that was such an interesting... I mean, I think it's interesting seeing Dracula in a different cultural lens.
Yes, agreed.
Particularly seeing him in Islam, through an Islamic frame of mind. And it doesn't play into the movie with any real differences as more, at least not as much as I expected. It still plays out pretty similarly, but I mean, I think it's interesting to see, at least on the surface level details, even if they are kind of funny like that.
Yeah, agreed. Like, it's just like, yeah, and like, I didn't mean to like downplay it. Like, it's just that's like the main thing that I thought of it. I was like, okay, like we're not going to do anything involving crucifixes, but we need something to fill that void in the plot. But I was also expecting it to have a little more of a narrative or thematic change in things, but it really didn't, which was interesting to me. It's just kind of like, okay, what does this story look like when you take away one of the fundamental traditions that it's perverting? You know what I mean? Well, I guess in terms of like wrapping things up with this actual film here, what did you think of this? What were some things that stood out to you? What did you like? What did you not like?
So I actually, on the whole, ended up enjoying this much more than I anticipated. I was worried going into this that I might not have that much to say. I was worried perhaps maybe there'd be a cultural barrier that would prevent me from analyzing this film on its own merits. I think sometimes you find particularly I think with foreign genre films, sometimes you have movies that, when they are taken out of the context of the culture in which they were created, it sometimes can feel unfair as like a 21st century American to try and look at it and appreciate it for what it was. And I was actually really happy that I was able to connect with this movie as much as I would. I was really impressed that it feels like this is, as far as Dracula adaptations go, this is really the standard bearer for actually adapting the contents of the book. It's weird to me that this isn't celebrated more because of that.
I'm completely in agreement with you. I was not really sure what to expect of this at all, again, because I'm unfamiliar with the cinema of the country. But yeah, I was really impressed. It definitely is not like a perfect movie, and there are sections of it that are either in bad shape technically, that like you're missing audio. There's some shots where you just have white because the film has been completely degraded. But that didn't really affect the experience too much for me. I enjoyed watching it a lot, and I'm in agreement with you there where like I was kind of surprised I haven't heard more about this, considering that like it's one of the first non-Western adaptations that we've seen, how accurate it is to the book. Yeah, I was pleasantly surprised, I will say. A couple of little things that I wanted to point out that like I can't really relate to anything else. There were some kind of like genuinely fun little bits in this that had like shockingly good senses of humor. One of them being the punch that we discussed. At one point, while Dracula is feeding off Shadan, who's Lucy, Mina is performing, and the performance that she is doing is a fundraiser for the Red Cross, like a blood drive, which I thought was like really cheeky. And that, as well as the little assistant, there's a moment where Dracula is watching Asmi, who is Harker, through the eyes of a painting, just like a lot of playing with tropes that I didn't expect to see in like a pretty straightforward adaptation. Just like some fun little bits that made me chuckle.
Great. It's very Scooby-Doo.
It's very Scooby-Doo. And the last line of the movie is as me throwing away the garlic after Dracula has been defeated out of the window. And with the translation, the last line is, "I'm sick of these garlics." And that just like I was just like, yeah, man, fucking me too. But yeah, I enjoy this. I would like to find more information about it. So like if any of you happen to know about this movie more than we were able to find, as you'll notice, we kind of skipped the contemporary review section because, Will, you were not able to find any trade magazines or periodicals from Turkey in 1953 on the internet, huh?
Yeah, I know. It's
crazy.
I'm as shocked as you are. I really should have done more diligent research in finding 50s film reviews from Turkey.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I had a good time with this. Should we get into our kind of rankings here?
Yeah, let's do it.
I think we're both in agreement where this Dracula is the lowest of the low currently. He's at the bottom of the totem pole. I'm very sorry.
Yeah, I am so sorry to you. Carlos Vieirius, congratulations. You're looking up, buddy.
Moving on up. I did also think it was funny that this opened with a straight up Bela Lugosi shot, and then we had like the opposite performance.
Yep.
And then because this Dracula is so lame, I would not describe him as creepy or sexy. I would describe him as boring.
Yeah, I mean, when he is creepy, it is, again, in that sort of, like, incel way of stalking you to work.
Yes. That was pretty spooky.
This isn't our first, this is not our first things, but this is our first incel Dracula.
This is our first Incelcula.
Yeah.
I'm sorry I said that. But yeah, let's talk a little bit about, I guess, where we're headed next. Should all things work out, we will be reviewing a film which we've never seen or recorded an episode before of the 1958 Hammer Dracula starring Christopher Lee.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to watching that movie I've certainly never seen before or recorded an episode on.
But this will be our last black and white film for a bit. I guess this kind of wraps up the first chunk of the podcast then in terms of like historical and primarily foreign films. I think the only American film that we've watched so far has been 1931 Bela Lugosi.
Yeah, I'm realizing that out of all the movies we've watched, only one of them has actually been in English when there's been language at all.
That's so funny. I didn't really catch that until now. But yeah, this has been like a good first foray. We're going to start getting into some fun stuff where we get to the 50s and 60s, and then the 70s we are going to have a crazy time, and there's so many Dracula adaptations in the 70s. Holy shit.
Yeah, I think this is our, we've got the baseline for Dracula, we've got sort of the structure of what a Dracula adaptation is, and I'm looking forward to seeing the next couple decades just freak on it a little bit.
So the next thing that we will do here in terms of segments is pick the out-of-context note from the other. And I'm excited about this one because there were some really goofy little things that we took notes on. Do you want to do me first?
I do. I think my favorite one here for you is he looking up porn?
Okay, listen, Harker at one point like pulls out a huge framed photograph of Mina, and because she is in showgirl attire and because of the nature of like the grainy fucking like cigarette burned film, it really looks like she's not wearing anything. And I was like, is he fully like in Dracula's castle pulling out his like giant framed porn? But yeah, I think upon closer inspection, she is wearing some sort of showgirl outfit, but it's a legitimate question, all right?
No, it is, because at that point you don't know that she is a showgirl, and
no!
You're used to these like chaste little locket portraits, and suddenly you've got like this glossy that's in a big frame, and it is, no, you're very right. It definitely looks like he's just looking at some porn in Dracula's castle, which, I mean, listen, he's stuck up there. He's got to pass the time somehow, right?
For real, unless he's like unhurriedly wandering around corridors for 5 minutes of the entire movie.
Yes.
And then my my note from you, which this genuinely made me laugh out loud, was, due to budget cuts, Dracula has one wife.
Yeah, it is so funny because like when Dracula's wife walks in, you kind of expect there to be a procession of them, and then it's just her, and it's like, oh, all right.
Oh, okay. Hey.
Yeah. And
hey,
she's, I think, there for literally like a minute before we get the hands off my man.
Hands off my man. Yeah, fucking so funny. And that brings us to our final section here, which is the reading of the Dracula tweet. And I believe it is my week, correct?
It is, yes.
Nice. All right, so this week's Dracula Twitter submission comes from M. Nate Shyamalan. That's funny. Tired. Actually, the doctor's name is Frankenstein? Wired. Every vampire is named Dracula.
It's so true. Referring to all vampires as Draculas is the best.
Is the funniest thing ever, and is involved in my favorite episode of Community.
It's a recurring bit on the Judge John Hodgman podcast, which I love.
Oh my god, that's so funny. I didn't know that. Well, anyway, I guess that wraps us up for this episode. Thank you guys for joining us for this very scheduled and not at all unexpected recording session.
Yeah, thank you for coming along with us on this episode.